What happens when one of Hollywood's most fearless young stars walks onto live television, knowing the questions won't be easy, and the woman across the table has built a career on asking them without apology? Before we step into that studio and feel the tension crackle in the air, take a second to hit that subscribe button for live narratives like this video, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because today's story is one you'll want to be part of. The lights inside the studio of The View are always bright, almost blinding. They're designed that way, no shadows, nowhere to hide. The audience is already buzzing, a low hum of anticipation rolling across the seats like distant thunder. On the massive screen behind the table, the name flashes in bold letters, Florence Pugh. When Florence Pugh steps out from backstage, she doesn't rush. She never does. There's a measured calm to her walk, shoulders squared, chin slightly lifted. She smiles, but it's the kind of smile that knows it's being watched by millions. Applause erupts, loud, warm, genuine. She waves, gives a small laugh, and takes her seat at the far end of the table. Across from her sits Whoopi Goldberg, moderator, icon, veteran of this battlefield of opinions. Whoopi's expression is relaxed, but her eyes are sharp, observing, measuring. The pleasantries begin. A few jokes about Florence's latest film. A light exchange about filming conditions. The audience laughs on cue. Florence leans forward, animated, telling a quick behind-the-scenes story. Her voice carries confidence, that smoky undertone that has become instantly recognizable in Hollywood. But the air shifts when Whoopi folds her hands on the table. "So," Whoopi says, tone casual but deliberate, "you've been very vocal lately." It's subtle, a tiny change in rhythm, but everyone feels it. Florence's smile softens. "I try to be honest," she replies. "Honest," Whoopi repeats, tilting her head. Some would say controversial. A few murmurs ripple through the audience. Not loud, just enough. Florence exhales through her nose, almost amused. Controversial for having an opinion? The camera cuts to Whoopi. She doesn't smile this time. For pushing back, she clarifies. For calling out the industry. For saying you're tired of how young women are treated. Florence nods slowly.
"Yes,
"I am tired."
her voice is steady."
Too steady. The audience claps lightly, but it's hesitant. Testing the temperature. Whoopi leans back in her chair. "But you're also thriving in that same industry," she counters. Blockbusters. Magazine covers. Fashion campaigns. Some people watching might wonder, how bad can it be? There it is. The spark. Florence's fingers tighten slightly around her coffee mug. She doesn't interrupt. She waits, a tactic learned from years of press tours and red carpets. Let them finish. Then strike clean. "How bad can it be?" she echoes softly. "You can succeed in a system and still see its flaws." Whoopi raises an eyebrow.
"Sure."
"But when you publicly criticize it, you're biting the hand that feeds you." A collective "oh" moves through the crowd. Not dramatic, but unmistakable. Florence's jaw shifts. She smiles again, but this time it doesn't reach her eyes. "I don't think accountability is biting," she says. "I think it's growing." The tension thickens, almost visible. The co-hosts glance at each other. One of them starts to interject, then stops. This is no longer a fluffy promo interview. This is something else. Whoopi taps her card on the table lightly. "You wore that sheer dress last year," she says carefully. "And when people criticized it, you said they were uncomfortable with women's bodies." Some thought that was deflecting. That maybe it wasn't about empowerment, it was about attention.
A gasp.
Audible this time. Florence doesn't look away. Inside, she feels it, the familiar tightening in her chest. The memory of headlines. Comment sections dissecting her body. Strangers deciding what parts of her were appropriate for public consumption. But she doesn't let it show. "Attention," she repeats quietly. "You think I need to wear a dress for attention?" The audience breaks into scattered applause. Whoopi doesn't flinch. "I think we live in a world where publicity and principles sometimes overlap." Florence leans forward now. The distance between them feels smaller. "And I think," she says, voice firm but controlled, that when a woman chooses what to do with her own body and the world reacts by shaming her, that says more about the world than about her. Applause, louder. A few cheers. Whoopi lifts a hand, calming the room. But criticism comes with fame. Yes, Florence agrees instantly. It does. But there's a difference between criticism of my work and obsession with my chest size. The audience goes silent. You can feel it the exact second the atmosphere turns electric. Whoopi studies her. So, you're saying no one's allowed to have an opinion? I'm saying, Florence replies, each word precise, that opinions rooted in policing women's bodies aren't harmless. And I won't pretend they are. A co-host shifts in her seat. Another glances at the producer off camera. Whoopi sighs softly. You're very passionate. I am, Florence says. Because I grew up watching women be told to shrink themselves. Smile more. Show less. Be grateful. I'm not interested in shrinking. The applause this time is divided, some enthusiastic, some restrained. The studio feels split down the middle. Whoopi nods slowly, but her expression has hardened just slightly. But you're also in a position of influence, she says. Young girls watch you. Do you think every choice you make sends the right message? Florence pauses. There's a flicker, just a flicker, of something vulnerable crossing her face. I think, she says carefully, the right message is that you get to choose. Not me.
Not you. Them.
Silence. Heavy, deliberate silence. The cameras zoom in on both women, 2 generations, 2 philosophies, sitting inches apart. And somewhere in that silence, you can feel it building. Because this isn't just about a dress, or fame, or headlines. It's about control.
Voice. Power.
And neither of them looks ready to back down. The silence doesn't break gently. It fractures. You can feel it in the way the audience shifts in their seats, in the way one of the co-hosts reaches for her mug just to have something to do with her hands. The lights feel hotter now, brighter, the air thinner. Whoopi Goldberg leans forward slightly, her voice lowering, not louder, not sharper, just more deliberate. Choice, she repeats. That's a powerful word. But let me ask you something, Florence. Do you believe every choice deserves applause? Florence Pugh doesn't blink. No, she answers calmly. But I believe every choice deserves autonomy. A murmur ripples through the studio. Whoopi nods once.
Fair.
But autonomy doesn't erase consequence. There it is again. That shift. That slight tightening of tone that signals this is no longer promotional banter. Florence tilts her head. Consequence like what? Like influence, Whoopi replies. Like the impact your actions have on young women who might not have your platform, your security, your resources. You step out in something bold, and you can handle the backlash.
Can they?
The audience hums in agreement. A few scattered claps. Florence exhales slowly. She crosses one leg over the other, buying a second to think, not because she doesn't have an answer, but because she knows every word is about to be dissected in real time. I don't want young women to copy me, she says finally. I want them to feel comfortable copying themselves. Applause. Louder this time. Whoopi watches her carefully. But you understand, she says, that some parents watching might say, that's not empowerment. That's exhibition. A sharp inhale from somewhere in the audience. Florence's jaw flexes. Exhibition, she repeats, her voice still even. But there's steel underneath now. So when men go shirtless on magazine covers, is that exhibition? A few audience members clap immediately. Whoopi doesn't react. We're not talking about men. That's exactly my point. Florence shoots back, just a shade faster than before. We never are. The co-host to Whoopi's left tries to interject gently. Maybe it's about context. Florence turns slightly toward her. Context is always used to control women's presentation. The room grows quieter. The cameras zoom closer. Whoopi folds her hands again. Florence, you're framing this as oppression. Some people see it as cultural standards. Cultural standards change, Florence replies instantly. They've changed because people push them. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. And you see yourself as someone pushing culture?
A beat.
Florence doesn't smile this time. I see myself as someone refusing to be pushed. The audience reacts, half applause, half stunned silence. You can feel it building now, not explosive, but tightening, like a wire being pulled slowly, steadily. Whoopi glances down at her card, then back up. You've also spoken about pay gaps, about directors who've underestimated you, about feeling dismissed on set. Some critics say you've had a relatively smooth ride compared to many actresses. That maybe the narrative of struggle doesn't fully match your reality. The words land heavier than anything before. For the first time, Florence's composure flickers. Not in anger, but in something deeper. You don't know my reality, she says quietly. The softness of it hits harder than a shout. Whoopi doesn't back off. Then tell us. The audience leans in. You can almost hear the shift of fabric against seats. Florence looks out toward the crowd instead of at Whoopi. For a second, she's not a movie star. She's just a woman deciding how much of herself to hand over on live television. I was told at 19 to lose weight, she begins. I was told my voice was too much. I was told to smile differently, to laugh softer. I've sat in rooms where men discussed my body like it was a prop. The studio is silent. And yes, she continues, her voice trembling just slightly now, I've been lucky. I've had incredible opportunities. But that doesn't cancel out the parts that were dehumanizing. A wave of applause rises, genuine, sustained. Whoopi listens without interruption this time. But here's the thing, Florence adds, turning back toward her. When I speak about those experiences, I'm not claiming to be the most oppressed person in Hollywood. I'm saying the system still needs work. Whoopi nods slowly. And you believe your way of challenging it is through visibility, through honesty, Florence corrects. There's a long pause. Then Whoopi asks the question that shifts everything again. Do you think, she says carefully, that sometimes the conversation becomes more about you than about the issue? A few gasps. A ripple of tension. Florence's eyes narrow, not angrily, but analytically. Explain. When you respond publicly, Whoopi continues, when you post statements, when you turn criticism into headlines, does that amplify the cause? Or does it amplify Florence Pugh? The words hang in the air like smoke. For the first time, a few audience members clap in agreement with Whoopi. Florence absorbs it. She doesn't rush. You think I enjoy reading thousands of comments about my body? She asks softly. Whoopi doesn't answer. You think I wake up excited to trend because strangers are debating my chest? Florence continues, her voice gaining strength. I respond because silence would feel like agreement. The audience erupts, this time clearly on her side. Whoopi lifts a hand, trying to steady the energy. No one's asking you to be silent. But they are, Florence replies immediately. That's what be less, show less, say less means. The applause grows louder. Whoopi's expression tightens slightly. There's a difference between being bold and being inflammatory. Florence leans forward again, eyes locked. And there's a difference between being provocative and being honest. The temperature in the room feels like it's risen 10 degrees. One co-host whispers something under her breath. Another glances toward the producers off camera. The segment was supposed to be 10 minutes. It's already stretched past that. Whoopi takes a slow breath. Let me ask you something personal, she says. Florence nods cautiously. When the backlash gets loud, Whoopi continues, when the criticism turns cruel, do you ever wonder if it's worth it? For the first time since the tension began, Florence hesitates. You can see it in her eyes, a flash of exhaustion, of vulnerability. Yes, she admits. The word lands softly. Yes, she repeats. There are nights I wish I'd stayed quiet, that I'd worn something safer, said something softer. The audience is completely still now. But then, she says, her voice steadier again, I remember the messages from young women saying, thank you for not apologizing. And I realize it's bigger than my comfort. Whoopi studies her, and for a split second, something shifts in her gaze. Not agreement, not surrender, but understanding. And what if, Whoopi asks gently, those same young women also need to hear that it's okay not to fight every battle? Florence's expression softens just a fraction.
It is okay, she says.
But I choose to. A long pause follows. The kind of pause that feels less like confrontation and more like two forces testing each other's gravity. The audience doesn't clap this time. They wait, because something deeper is unfolding now. This isn't just a debate about dresses or headlines anymore. It's about generational philosophy, about how change should look, loud and visible or measured. And as the cameras tighten on their faces, you can sense that neither woman is finished. The studio feels different now. Not louder, not chaotic,
Heavier.
the kind of heaviness that settles when two people stop circling each other and begin speaking from places that aren't rehearsed. The applause from Florence's last words fades into a hush. Even the audience members who had been nodding confidently before now sit still, sensing the shift. This isn't about winning anymore. It's about something more personal. Whoopi Goldberg rests her chin lightly against her knuckles, studying Florence Pugh not as an opponent, but as a young woman who reminds her of someone she once knew. "Let me tell you something," Whoopi begins, her voice lower than before. Less sharp, more reflective. "When I came into this business, there were no lanes for someone like me. No blueprint. No empowerment campaigns. If you were different, you survived by being undeniable." Florence listens carefully, her posture straight, but her expression open. "You didn't challenge every comment," Whoopi continues. "You picked your battles, because the industry could shut you out without blinking." The audience nods, some murmuring in agreement. Florence doesn't interrupt. She lets the words breathe. "And I worry," Whoopi says, turning slightly toward her, "that this generation believes the fight has to be constant,
Public.
immediate, that every criticism deserves a rebuttal. Sometimes silence is power." A ripple of applause follows that. Florence presses her lips together for a moment before responding. "I respect that," she says sincerely. "I do. And I know you paved roads I get to walk on. But the reason I can speak now is because someone before me didn't stay silent." That lands. Whoopi's eyes narrow just slightly, not in anger, but in focus. "You think I stayed silent?" she asks, voice measured. "I think you survived differently," Florence replies carefully. "And I'm surviving differently." The tension spikes again, not explosive, but electric. One of the co-hosts shifts, clearly aware this is teetering on something bigger. Whoopi leans forward. "Survival isn't quiet weakness," she says. "It's strategy." "And strategy evolves," Florence answers. "We have social media now. We have direct access. If I don't speak, someone else speaks for me." The audience reacts to that. Soft claps, thoughtful murmurs. Whoopi exhales slowly. "And what happens when the noise drowns you out? When every statement becomes another headline cycle?" Florence's eyes flicker. That one hits closer than she wants it to. "I've thought about that," she admits. The room is silent again. "There are days," she continues, "when it feels like I'm screaming into a storm, like nothing changes, like people just get louder." Her voice is softer now, not defiant, human. "But then," she says, steadying herself, "I remember being 16, reading interviews where actresses pretended everything was fine, pretended the pressure didn't hurt, and I felt alone. I don't want someone else to feel that." The audience breaks into gentle applause.
Whoopi nods slowly.
"So, you see transparency as responsibility?" "Yes." "And you don't fear being reduced to the outspoken one instead of the talented one?" Florence gives a small, almost ironic smile. "I'm already reduced sometimes. For my clothes, my body, my relationships. At least this way, I choose what defines me." That line lands like a stone dropped into still water. The camera catches a woman in the audience, wiping at her eye. Whoopi studies Florence for a long moment. Then she says something unexpected.
"You know what I see?" she asks.
Florence waits. "I see someone tired of being told how to exist." The words aren't confrontational. They're observational. Florence nods slowly. "That's fair." "But," Whoopi adds gently, I also see someone carrying the weight of every young woman on her shoulders. A flicker crosses Florence's face, something between pride and exhaustion. I don't want to carry them, she says honestly. I just don't want to disappoint them. The audience goes quiet again. Whoopi tilts her head. Why is that your job? The question hangs in the air longer than any before. Florence blinks, caught slightly off guard. It's not, she says after a pause. But influence doesn't come with an instruction manual. You just wake up one day and realize people are listening. And that scares you? Whoopi presses. Yes, Florence admits, barely above a whisper. The vulnerability shifts the entire atmosphere. For the first time since the segment began, the tension isn't combative. It's raw. Whoopi softens visibly. It should scare you, she says. It means you care. A quiet murmur of agreement rolls through the audience. But caring, Whoopi continues, doesn't mean you have to respond to everything. The world will always have opinions, especially about women who refuse to fit neatly into boxes. Florence lets out a small breath of laughter. I've never fit neatly anywhere. That's not a flaw, Whoopi says firmly. That's power. The applause this time is united. But just as the moment feels like it might settle into mutual respect, Whoopi shifts again, because she isn't finished. There's one more thing, she says. The audience stiffens. You've said before that criticism about your appearance reflects society's discomfort with strong women. Do you believe every critique of your choices is rooted in sexism? The air tightens instantly. Florence's expression grows serious again. No, she answers carefully. Not every critique. Then where's the line? Whoopi asks. The line, Florence says, leaning forward once more, is intent. Is someone discussing my performance? Or dissecting my body? Is someone questioning my ideas? Or mocking my femininity? And who decides that intent? Whoopi counters. I do, Florence says without hesitation. The audience reacts, some clapping, others murmuring. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. That's a lot of authority to give yourself. It's my experience, Florence replies. I'm the one living it. A long pause. Then Whoopi says quietly, and what if sometimes you're wrong? The question slices through the studio like a blade. Florence doesn't answer immediately. For the first time, doubt flickers visibly across her face. Not insecurity, but introspection. I might be, she admits slowly. I'm human. The audience exhales almost collectively. But I'd rather risk being wrong while standing up for myself, she continues, than be right while shrinking. That line detonates the room into applause. Even some who had been skeptical now nod. Whoopi leans back in her chair, crossing her arms. Not defensively, but thoughtfully. You're not shrinking, she says. No, Florence agrees. I'm not. And in that moment, it's clear this isn't a battle to silence each other. It's a collision of eras. Of survival versus confrontation. Of strategic endurance versus vocal disruption. The producers signal from off-camera, they're running long. The segment was meant to pivot to lighter topics by now. But no one wants it to end. Because something real is happening. And both women know it. The question isn't who's right. It's what this conversation will cost them once the cameras stop rolling. The producers are waving from off-camera now. You can see it in the quick glances from the co-hosts, the subtle hand signals meant to steer the conversation back to safer ground. A cue card is lifted. A stage manager mouths, wrap it up. But neither Whoopi Goldberg nor Florence Pugh moves to retreat. The air feels charged, like the final seconds before a storm breaks. Whoopi clears her throat softly. We're almost out of time, she says, though her tone suggests she knows that's not entirely true. Time stretches when moments matter. Florence nods once, but her posture remains forward. Engaged. Unfinished. There's something I want to clarify, Whoopi continues. Because I don't want people thinking this is about tearing you down. It's not. Florence's expression softens slightly. I didn't think it was. But I am challenging you, Whoopi says plainly. Because when you speak as loudly as you do, people will push back just as loudly. And I don't want you mistaking pushback for oppression every time. The audience reacts with a low murmur. Florence considers that carefully. I don't think disagreement is oppression, she says slowly. I think patterns are. Explain, Whoopi replies. Florence inhales deeply, and for a moment, the fiery edge is replaced with something steadier, almost weary. When women speak confidently, she says, we're called difficult. When we defend our bodies, we're called attention-seeking. When we demand equal pay, we're called ungrateful. That pattern is exhausting. Applause erupts, stronger now, unified. Whoopi doesn't interrupt. She lets the applause fade on its own. And you don't think men are criticized? Whoopi asks gently. Of course they are, Florence says. But rarely for taking up space. The studio falls quiet again. Whoopi's gaze sharpens. You think you're being criticized for taking up space? Florence meets her eyes without hesitation. Yes. There's no anger in it now. Just certainty. A co-host leans forward, trying to bridge the gap. Maybe the real question is, how do we move forward? How do we support young women without creating pressure for them to be constantly fighting? It's the first time the tone shifts toward resolution. Florence nods slightly. By showing them multiple ways to exist, she says. Some can be loud. Some can be strategic. Some can be quiet. None are wrong. Whoopi studies her face carefully. And you don't judge the quiet ones? No, Florence says instantly. Then softer. I used to. When I was younger, I thought silence meant surrender. A few surprised murmurs ripple through the audience. But I've learned, she continues, that sometimes silence is survival. And that's valid too. The admission changes the energy again. Whoopi's shoulders relax just a fraction. That's growth, she says. Florence gives a small, almost shy smile. I'm trying. The audience lets out a collective breath, like tension slowly releasing. But Whoopi isn't done yet.
There's another side to this, she says.
And it's uncomfortable. The room tightens once more. You are powerful now, Whoopi continues. You have influence. And power can distort perspective. How do you make sure you're still listening? Florence pauses longer this time. It's not a defensive pause. It's thoughtful. I surround myself with people who don't care that I'm famous, she says finally. Friends who call me out. Family who reminds me who I am. And when the criticism comes from outside that circle, Whoopi presses. Florence exhales slowly. I try to separate cruelty from critique. I don't always succeed. There's honesty in that answer that catches the room off guard. Whoopi nods approvingly. That's real. The applause that follows is softer, but more respectful. Florence shifts slightly in her seat, her earlier fire now balanced with reflection. Can I ask you something? She says suddenly. The audience perks up immediately. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. Go ahead. When you were my age, Florence asks, did you ever wish you'd spoken louder? The question lands like a stone dropped into deep water. Whoopi doesn't answer immediately. For the first time since the segment began, she looks away from Florence, toward the audience, toward the lights, toward something further back in memory. Yes, she says quietly. The single word echoes. Yes, she repeats, firmer this time. There were times I swallowed things I shouldn't have. The studio is completely silent. And there were times, she adds, when speaking cost me more than I expected. Florence nods slowly, absorbing it. So maybe, Whoopi says, turning back to her, the balance is knowing which moments are worth the cost. Florence's eyes glisten, not with tears, but with understanding. I think this one was, she says softly. The audience breaks into sustained applause, no longer divided. The co-host beside Whoopi laughs nervously. Well, this wasn't the interview we planned. Light laughter ripples through the crowd, easing the intensity just slightly. But the emotional charge lingers. Whoopi reaches across the table, not dramatically, not for show, but briefly places her hand over Florence's. It's a small gesture.
Quick.
Almost easy to miss. You're going to be fine, Whoopi says quietly. Florence squeezes her hand back. So are you. The audience reacts warmly, some standing, some clapping harder than before. The producer finally steps in, voice echoing lightly from off-camera. We have to go to break. Whoopi turns back to the camera, professionalism snapping gently back into place. When we come back, she says, we'll talk about Florence's new film. The crowd laughs at the understatement. But as the cameras begin to pull back, capturing the wide shot of the table, it's clear something bigger just happened. Not a shouting match.
Not a meltdown.
Something rarer. Two generations clashed, without cruelty, without collapse. And as the show cuts to commercial, the audience is still buzzing. Because once the cameras stop rolling, the real storm begins. Clips will circulate. Quotes will be isolated. Headlines will be sharpened. And outside these studio walls, millions will choose sides. The calm inside the room? It won't last. The cameras cut. The bright red on air sign flickers off. And for a split second, there is nothing but the hum of studio equipment and the sound of people breathing out tension they didn't realize they were holding. Then the noise begins. Audience members stand, some clapping harder than they did during the broadcast, others immediately reaching for their phones. You can already see screens lighting up, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Clips are being uploaded before Florence has even left her chair. Across the table, Florence Pugh exhales slowly, rolling her shoulders back as if releasing invisible weight. Her public composure is still intact, but up close there's a faint tremor in her hands. Whoopi Goldberg adjusts her glasses and leans back in her chair, expression thoughtful. Not rattled, not triumphant, just reflective. They exchange a look that isn't meant for the audience. It's brief, but it says everything. Respect, challenge, recognition. A production assistant rushes over to Florence with a mic pack removal kit, whispering something about social media already going crazy. Florence laughs softly at that, though it sounds more like disbelief than amusement. Already, she asks. Already, the assistant confirms. Across the studio, Whoopi is speaking quietly with one of the producers. There's no visible frustration, no irritation, just a low, measured conversation. A producer gestures toward a monitor showing a replay of one of the sharper exchanges. You think I stayed silent. / you survived differently. It's looping. It will keep looping. Backstage, Florence finally allows herself to sit down in the quiet of the dressing room. The door closes, muting the outside noise. For the first time all morning, she's alone. She stares at her reflection. Was it too much? Was it enough? Her phone buzzes on the table.
Once. Twice.
Then, relentlessly, messages from friends, fellow actors, stylists, family. One text stands out. You were brave. Another, they're twisting it already. Florence closes her eyes briefly. She knew this would happen. Every sentence clipped. Every pause interpreted. Every facial expression analyzed frame by frame. Meanwhile, in another part of the building, Whoopi sits quietly for a moment before the next segment begins taping. A younger staff member approaches cautiously. You okay? They ask. Whoopi smiles faintly. I've had worse Tuesdays. But as she turns toward the monitor replaying the debate, there's something in her eyes, something heavier than entertainment. Because she recognizes the fire she saw across the table. She had it once too. Within an hour, headlines explode across entertainment sites. Florence Pugh clashes with Whoopi Goldberg on live TV. Generational showdown on The View. Empowerment or exhibition. Heated debate erupts. Clips from The View trend across platforms. The moment Florence says, I'd rather risk being wrong while standing up for myself than be right while shrinking, is shared thousands of times within minutes. Some call her fearless. Others call her naive. Some praise Whoopi for holding her accountable. Others accuse her of undermining a younger woman's voice. The internet splits, as it always does. Reaction videos pop up before the afternoon is over. Commentators dissect tone, posture, word choice. Body language experts analyze who leaned forward first, who blinked more, who broke eye contact. But the truth of what happened in that studio is more complicated than a viral clip. It wasn't a fight. It was friction. Necessary friction. By evening, Florence steps out of the building into a crowd of photographers. The flashes are blinding. Questions are shouted over one another. Florence, any regrets? Do you think Whoopi was unfair? Was that planned? She pauses just long enough to answer one. No regrets, she says calmly. Conversations are important. Then she gets into the car. Later that night, Whoopi addresses the moment briefly at the top of the next live taping. Yesterday's conversation got people talking, she says directly to the camera. That's what we do here. We talk. No apology. No escalation. Just acknowledgement. Florence, meanwhile, posts a simple message hours later. Growth requires discomfort. Thank you for the space. The comment section explodes again. Support. Criticism.
Debate.
But beneath the noise, something quieter is happening. Young women are reposting the clip with captions like, "Not shrinking." Older women are sharing Whoopi's line, "Silence can be power." The conversation moves beyond them, and that's when it becomes bigger than both of them. Weeks later, when the viral storm has settled into a distant echo, people still reference that morning. Film journalists bring it up during press junkets. Panelists mention it during media discussions about generational feminism. College classrooms even play the clip during debates about public discourse. Because what unfolded wasn't just television drama. It was two eras meeting head-on without screaming, without collapse. Florence didn't back down. Whoopi didn't surrender. They stood in their truths and let the audience wrestle with the space in between. And maybe that's the real intensity, not raised voices, but raised standards. Back in her dressing room days later, Florence reflects during another interview. I don't want to be right all the time, she says quietly. I just don't want to be silent. Somewhere else, Whoopi offers her own perspective when asked about it again. Young voices should be loud, she says. But they should also listen. And so should we. The storm fades, but the impact lingers. Because millions watched two women disagree, passionately, intelligently, emotionally, without tearing each other apart. And in today's climate, that might be the most shocking part of all. Now I want to hear from you. Who do you think made the stronger case? Was Florence right to stand firm and speak boldly? Or was Whoopi right about strategy, about choosing battles wisely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue the conversation respectfully. And if you felt the intensity of that studio, if you could almost hear the silence between their words, make sure you subscribe to Live Narratives for more explosive, emotional stories from the moments that shake the spotlight. Because sometimes the real drama isn't in the shouting. It's in the silence that follows.